Chapter 30:56. Chen didn't understand why he was so stubborn. Why did he have to pick up a lost love? Her eyes were a little confused. When Lanyu brought the food over, he saw her in a daze. He smiled faintly. What's wrong? Chen shook her head and lowered her head to eat quietly. Lanyu didn't eat. He just sat opposite her and quietly smoked a cigarette. When he raised his hand, the wound on his palm was clearly visible, but she didn't ask. He thought that she didn't love him anymore and still hated him, so he didn't care that he hurt her. And he actually hoped that she would care about him, even if it was just one sentence. He was so good to her, spoiling her and spoiling her. His heart was full and empty. He didn't know what was wrong with him. What did he want? He clearly got it, but he was so unsatisfied. If he wasn't satisfied, he would find it at night. That night, no matter what she was thinking, he pressed on her again and again, as intense as if it was the first time he touched her. Chen bit her lip and turned her face to the side. She had been holding it in. Only when he was really heavy would she let out a soft moan. Just like that, they continued like this until it was late at night when he finally let go of her. It was like that between a husband and wife, but the silence after it was so empty. Chen. He hugged her and buried his face in her hair. His voice was a little low. What do I have to do to get you back? Tell me. She lay quietly and reached out to hug him. She spoke, her voice a little hoarse and a little light. Did I make you uncomfortable, Lanyu? Why do you keep me by your side if you're uncomfortable? He was stunned for a long time. After a long silence, he said in a low voice, I just want you to treat me better, even just a little bit. Chen hugged his shoulder, her face on his shoulder. I'm sorry. There were some things she couldn't help him with. Lanyu hugged her quietly for a long time before letting her go. His sadness seemed to have been swept away, and he was once again full of vigor. I'm going to wash you up, he murmured and carried her to the bathroom. There he loved her again, tenderly this time. If he wanted something, Chen would give it to him. She had never refused. In the end, he leaned on her shoulder and panted. You didn't reject him because you wanted to see Romeo? Chen didn't say anything, which was a tacit agreement. Lanyu calmed down for a while, stood under the shower, and finally took a towel to wipe his body. As he wiped, he said, He's with my dad. He did not send Romeo abroad. Chen frowned. Not happy. He pinched her face. I thought you'd be happy. With that said, he pulled her over and kissed her for a long time before speaking in a hoarse voice. I'll bring him back tomorrow. But you know what I'll do if you leave. Lanyu, you don't have to remind yourself how much of a jerk you are. Chen snorted coldly. Lanyu smiled faintly, carried her back to the master bedroom, and kissed her face. Do you feel bullied? She was too lazy to care about him. Lanyu smiled, pulled the quilt over to wrap her up, and kissed her. Actually, Romeo is doing well with my father. Why don't we let him take care of him for 2 years? He wanted to spend time alone with her. 2 years should be enough to make her fall in love with him again. Chapter 30:57. The next day, Chen brought Chen to his father's house to pick up Xiao Romeo. This was Chen's request. Lanyu's car drove into his father's villa, and Xiao Romeo ran out. Uncle Lan. Xiao Romeo was very close to Lanyu, probably because they were related by blood. Lanyu picked him up and kissed him. Are you a good boy? Xiao Romeo nodded. Yes. Lanyu smiled. He knew that he didn't want to go to school. Xiao Romeo grew up abroad, so he hadn't adapted to this place yet. It was difficult for him to get along with his classmates. Xiao Romeo didn't like to go to school, but he still liked to play. At this time, Xiao Romeo hugged Lanyu's neck. He saw Chen and hugged him. Mom. No matter how good Grandpa Lan was, he still missed his mom. Chen hugged him and buried his face in the little boy's hair. It was small and soft. She had once said that she could give Romeo to Lanyu, but she couldn't bear to do it. She hugged the little boy and took a deep breath. Xiao Romeo looked at his mom and asked seriously, Mom, are you really going to get married to Uncle Lan? He gestured and said, the kind who wears a wedding dress. Chen smiled faintly and, yes. Xiao Rongyu looked at Lan Yu, and then at his mom. He blushed and asked, "Does Mom love Uncle Lan?" Qin Chen gave a vague yes. What did he mean? Xiao Rongyu didn't understand, and looked at her. Lan Yu walked over and asked, "What are you talking about?" Qin Chen shook his head. "No, nothing." Xiao Rongyu gave his mom a mocking look and said, "I asked Mom if she loves Uncle Lan." Lan Yu looked at him and smiled. What did Mom say? After asking, he looked at Qin Chen with clear eyes. Qin Chen ignored him and threw Rongyu to him. "I don't want my son anymore." Xiao Rongyu looked at Lan Yu with a pitiful expression. Lan Yu smiled. "Your mother is just shy." "Really?" Little Rongyu was doubtful. Lan Yu reached out and stroked his soft hair. "Adults are very complicated. Your mother used to love me so much that she couldn't help herself. She was willing to give up everything for me." Rongyu's eyes sparkled. "What about now?" Lan Yu paused for a moment, and then responded with a as well. Xiao Rongyu urged him, "Do you love her now?" "This, you have to ask your mother." Lan Yu's voice is quite light. Xiao Rongyu pursed his lips. She only knows how to say N. The more Xiao Rong thought about it, the more he thought about it. He definitely didn't love her anymore. If he did, it wouldn't be like this. Although he didn't really like his mother marrying someone else, he still hoped that his mother would marry love. Well, it was just like what was shown on TV. Qin Chen looked at them and could roughly guess what they were talking about, but she didn't say anything. Papa Lan was quite happy. This time they were really going to get married. Although they had gotten a marriage certificate before, it was a secret marriage. It meant that they would divorce if they didn't like it. Now, it was good that it was public. If it was public, it wouldn't be easy to get a divorce. He knew his son very well. Papa Lan cooked a meal and sent them home early after eating. He also asked them to bring Xiao Rongyu back. Chapter 30:58. Lan Yu told him that Xiao Rong was his flesh and blood, which was really great. Finally, the Lan family had a descendant. When the car left, Father Lan watched it go away with a loving look on his face. He thought about the conversation with his son. He asked Lan Yu if he wanted to change the name of the child. Lan Yu hesitated for a moment and said that it was okay. To be honest, he was quite disappointed. This was the child of the Lan family. Father Lan stared at the car until it was out of sight. In the car, Lan Yu focused on the road ahead and asked Xiao Rongyu, "Where do you want to go?" Xiao Rongyu thought about it and said, "I want to go home." Lan Yu smiled and turned the car into the highway. In less than half an hour, the car drove into the villa, but Xiao Rongyu fell asleep. When Lan Yu opened the car door, his face was very gentle, and his voice was also soft. "Let me carry him." He gently picked up the child and carried him to the children's room upstairs. Only then did Qin Chen realize that the room had been rearranged. She thought bitterly, the treatment of a biological child and a child is different. Lan Yu didn't leave immediately after putting down Xiao Rongyu. Instead, he sat quietly and looked at him for a while. Qin Chen went back to his room first. She couldn't look at his infatuated eyes. Lan Yu looked for a while, got up and walked back to his bedroom. Qin Chen was already lying down for an afternoon nap. There were faint green shadows under her eyes, which meant that she hadn't slept well these days. Lan Yu knew that it was because of his excessive needs. His face was a little hot, and he lay down beside her to catch up on his sleep. When Qin Chen woke up, Lan Yu was gone. She put her face on the pillow and closed her eyes slightly while smelling the good smell. Rongyu's happy voice came from downstairs. She lay down for a while, put on a morning robe, and looked down from the second floor. Lan Yu and Xiao Rongyu were sitting on the sofa on the first floor, playing checkers. They were having a good time. She hadn't seen Rongyu so happy for a long time. Even a child with such a high IQ used to think that this game was too retarded, but now he was so happy. And Lan Yu, was he that free? How could he be this serious when playing with a child? Qin Chen felt a little disgusted when he looked at it. However, he looked at it for a long time. Silently, she returned to her room. Downstairs, Xiao Rongyu quietly said, "Uncle Lan, Mama was peeping just now." Lan Yu replied indifferently, "He's peeking at me."
Not you. Why?
Xiao Rongyu was not convinced. Lanyu looked upstairs and said slowly, "You came out of her belly. Not holding your hand is like holding her own hand."
How can I feel anything?
Xiao Rongyu's face was full of suspicion. "You make it sound like Mom has feelings for you." His father's face darkened. "Why is it gone?" Xiao Rongyu faintly sighed. "If I have feelings, Uncle Lan, you don't have to force it." Lan Yu, there was no way to communicate with this son of his. After he finished playing checkers, he said, "I'm going upstairs. If I can't win, I'll be shameless." Xiao Rongyu secretly made a face at his back. Lan Yu turned around and said, "Don't secretly change places in the future if I don't see you." This time, it was Xiao Rongyu who felt that there was no way to communicate happily. Lan Yu stood in the middle of the stairs and frowned. "I heard that you want to be a lawyer in the future. A lawyer must have the spirit of seeking truth from facts." Xiao Rongyu smiled and said, "In the future, I plan to serve a profiteer like Uncle Lan." Lan Yu, MMP. Chapter 30:59. Lan Yu stared at Xiao Rongyu for a while, then turned around and went upstairs. The door of the master bedroom was closed. He pushed the door open and saw Qin Chen leaning against the bed, reading a magazine. Hearing the sound of the door closing, she tilted her head and said, "Are you done with the game?" Lan Yu walked to the bed and sat down. He took the magazine from her hand and said, "Let's go to take wedding photos later." "There's no need for that." Qin Chen looked disinterested. Lan Yu frowned and said, "We have to hold a wedding. Aren't you going to wear a wedding dress?" "It's up to you. Just make it according to my size. Don't take photos." "I don't like to take photos," Qin Chen said calmly. Lan Yu frowned and said, "Qin Chen, you're deliberately going against me, aren't you?" "I don't dare. Otherwise, Mr. Lan will make it impossible for me to see my son again," Qin Chen said sarcastically. The veins on Lan Yu's forehead were bulging, but he couldn't do anything to her. He pursed his lips and held her chin. "Then I'll threaten you now. If you don't take photos, I'll..." Childish. Qin Chen sat up and walked into the fitting room without saying anything. Lan Yu followed her and leaned against the door. She didn't avoid him and changed her clothes directly in front of him. To be honest, her figure was perfect a few years ago, but it seemed to have become more attractive after giving birth. Lan Yu looked at his wife's perfect figure and said, "Actually, you want to go, but you don't mean it. It's just like in bed. You obviously like it, but you say no. You say that I forced you." Qin Chen glanced at him and said, "Lan Yu, you can always be shameless in such a unique way." Lan Yu only smiled faintly and did not say anything. Qin Chen changed her clothes and followed him downstairs to get in the car. To her surprise, the wedding photos he mentioned were taken outdoors. It wasn't a grand wedding dress, but a simple dress. On the other hand, he was wearing his regular clothes, a classic black and white suit. He brought her to a beautiful street, and the photographer behind him was in charge of taking pictures. Qin Chen looked at his hand being held and frowned. "Lan Yu, are you in love?" Lan Yu stood in front of the cotton candy machine. "Bought two, one for her. Mrs. Lan, we are going to get married soon. You can rest assured that I will be loyal to marriage. People with criminal records can't be trusted, but I don't care." She nibbled on the pink cotton candy and looked at him. He looked at her intently. This scene was captured by the cameraman. Lan Yu brought her to many other places and took pictures of her at every place. When the night fell and the photos were taken, Qin Chen was exhausted. Lan Yu took her to the studio. She collapsed on the sofa, still wearing the little dress. Lan Yu was communicating with the photographer. In the end, he chose about 20 photos and bound them into a book. The cotton candy one would be used as the wedding photo, and he would also make a crystal one to hang on the bed. Originally, these were things that women liked to do, but now Lan Yu was doing them. He was also happy to do it. He was thinking that if it was the previous Qin Chen, the Qin Chen in men's clothes, he would probably still be the one to do their wedding, and others would even guess which one of them was the main one. This was actually not bad. After choosing the photos, he looked at her and smiled. "It's done." Chapter 3060. He was very gentle and accommodating to her. It wasn't that Chin didn't feel it, but she couldn't respond to him. She got up and left with him. Instead of driving back immediately, he took her to a restaurant.
It was a seafood restaurant.
Standing at the door, Lanyu said quietly, "You used to like it very much. Later, I learned to make you supper, paella. But you might not like it anymore." Last time, she said she didn't like it, so he didn't make it again. But they were going to get married, so he couldn't help but bring her here to see the place they used to walk together. Maybe she wouldn't remember the past for the rest of her life, or maybe she wouldn't be able to love him again for the rest of her life, but this time, he would love her well. Chin looked at him quietly. "Come in and have a seat." She could feel his emotions, so she didn't object. She sat in the restaurant with him. The restaurant wasn't big, nor was it particularly elegant, but there were many customers. The waiter quickly brought the menu over. He seemed to know Lanyu and said naturally, "Mr. Lan is here again." As he said that, he looked at Chin. "Is this Mrs. Lan? Is she also your girlfriend, who always packed?" Lanyu looked at the menu and nodded slightly. Chin was a little surprised. After he ordered, he asked him, "Did you come here often in the past? I mean, when I wasn't here, when I was in France." Lanyu lit a cigarette and said faintly, "When I hate you very much, I'll come over for a meal and pack a meal." Chin held his chin. "Who ate the food you packed?" "The dog fed it," Lanyu said honestly. Chin glared at him. "Lanyu, you bastard." He chuckled softly. "There's something even more bastardly. Do you want to hear it?" Of course, she chose not to listen. At this time, the waiter brought over a seafood platter. It was all freshly grilled seafood, and each one was very beautiful. Chin was a little embarrassed. "I thought there was nothing else here except for seafood and curry rice." Lanyu smiled faintly and put out the cigarette. He picked up an especially large Australian lobster and peeled it. He peeled a large piece of meat and placed it in the bowl in front of her. "For me?" Chin was a little surprised. Lanyu raised an eyebrow. "What else? I thought you were going to feed the dogs." Chin deliberately picked on him. Lanyu smiled. "Puppy, come and eat." As he spoke, he peeled another one and stuffed it directly into her mouth. The prawn meat was too big, so it was stuffed to the brim. She didn't even have the chance to speak or protest. She could only eat it. After he finished eating, he glanced at him. Childish. The childish man continued to feed, smiling faintly. For a moment, Chin felt his love for her. At least, at this moment, he should love her. Or, he really loved her in the past. She asked softly, "Lanyu, do you want me to get my memory back?" He was still busy peeling the prawns. When he heard that, he just shook his head. "It's good that you don't remember." Chin didn't ask anymore. She ate the seafood he served and looked at his greasy hands from time to time. Her hands were clean. After a while, Lanyu asked for beer. Chin looked at him. "I don't drink. It's me." He smiled and gave her the car key. "You drive later." Chin glared at him. Lanyu smiled. "I want to drink some." Chapter 30:61. The waiter brought the beer over and glanced at Lanyu when he put it down. "Thank you." Lanyu smiled faintly. The waiter's face turned red. Chin looked at him. After the waiter left, she snorted and said, "The market seems to be good." Lanyu took off his jacket and very slowly placed it on the back of the chair. He very slowly rolled up his sleeves and very slowly said, "I have very high standards." He began to drink, eating seafood while drinking, and occasionally peeling some for her. Chin was indifferent. He was full after eating for a while. Lanyu, on the other hand, ate for a long time. He seemed to be in a good mood and drank a lot of beer. Later, he asked the waiter for 2 more bottles. Chin couldn't help saying, "Lanyu, if I drink to death, won't you become the richest widow?" He looked at her and smiled calmly. "Don't worry, I signed an agreement. If I'm gone one day, everything I have will be yours." He added, "Rongyu is still young, so I'll give you Chin. Chin's voice was a little dry. "Lanyu, that's not what I meant." "But that's what I meant, Chin." Lanyu said seriously, "No one can predict tomorrow. What he didn't say was that he wanted to hold today. She and roam you today. Qin Chun pursed his lips and didn't know what to say. Lan Yu smiled. I'm just saying if, Chun Chun. I'm not someone who will die after drinking a few bottles of beer. Qin Chun glared at him. He smiled and poured himself another bottle of beer. Qin Chun suddenly raised his voice. Waiter, 5 more bottles. Lan Yu raised his eyebrows. I want you to drink to death. Qin Chun smiled softly and said slowly. Lan Yu's eyes were a little clear. You want me to die so much? At this moment, the waiter came over and brought 5 more bottles of beer. Lan Yu placed 2 bottles in front of Qin Chun. Let's drink together. Don't you expect me to drive? Qin Chun's voice was indifferent. Lan Yu smiled. I'll find a designated driver later. Qin Chun didn't refuse anymore and directly took the bottle to drink. Lan Yu watched quietly and reached out to pick a crab for her. Have some more. She raised her eyes and stared at him silently. A moment later, she pursed her lips and ate it. Lan Yu smiled. Now you're cute. Qin Chun was speechless, but she still ate it. After he finished eating, he handed her another beer. Just like that, Qin Chun got drunk, and Lan Yu didn't call for a designated driver. He carried her on his back when they went out. The night was cold, and the streets were full of neon lights. Qin Chun lay on Lan Yu's back. She opened her eyes in a daze and only saw his black head. She bit her lower lip. Where are we? On the way home, Lan Yu said softly. Chun Chun, do you still remember the way home? She loved him, but she forgot the way home. She was drunk. Perhaps her subconscious mind could remember that she had loved him. Now it was just because he was hateful and he treated her badly. Chun Chun, no matter how bad I treat you, please don't leave. I will find a way to take you home. Under the starry sky, he carried her on his back. He could have taken a car, but he insisted on carrying her home. He carried her on his back so far and carried her on his back through the streets they had been to together. The streetlights elongated their silhouettes, so long that Lan Yu felt a little sad. He stood still and looked at the night in front of him. He said to the person behind him in a low voice, Chun Chun, we're back. She was drunk and couldn't hear him at all. Perhaps he said that because she couldn't hear him. Chapter 3062. Lan Yu carried her on his back. Instead of going back to the villa, he went to her apartment. They took the elevator up to the door of her apartment. He turned sideways and said softly, Chun Chun, key? What key? She tilted her head and asked. Then, she looked at the door of the apartment and smiled. I know my home. She pinched his handsome face and asked innocently, Lan Yu, why did you come to my house? What do you want to do? She asked innocently, which was not like her, nor was it like how she used to be. However, Lan Yu's heart was very soft. Chun Chun, you've never acted like a spoiled child to me before. He smiled and put her down. Then, he took her bag and rummaged through it for the key. Qin Chun was unwilling. She snatched the bag from his hand and bit her lip. I'll get it myself. However, she couldn't find it for a long time. She had a bad temper, so she threw the bag on the ground and sulked. She had never been like this. Lan Yu had never seen her drunk, so he was surprised. However, he remembered that she used to be a doctor, so she usually didn't drink. He didn't expect her to be like this when she was drunk. He looked at her and slowly squatted down, as if to accompany her or to laugh at her. You're angry?
No.
Qin Chun looked at him and then bit her lip. Lan Yu, if I'm angry, will you comfort me? Her eyes were straight and particularly seductive. At least, Lan Yu was seduced. She wasn't young anymore, and she wasn't an innocent girl. She was also a mother of a child, but at this moment, her eyes were pure and seductive. Lan Yu sighed and didn't open the door. Instead, he squatted down and kissed her for a while. Their soft lips touched gently and slowly. The sound was a little warm, and there was an indescribable feeling. It was like a heartbeat, like first love. This feeling happened when Qin Chun was drunk. Lan Yu was not satisfied with this kind of contact, and began to deepen the kiss. His face was very hot, and so was hers. Finally, He was satisfied and released her a little. She was still drunk and licked her lips.
Lanyu?
He smiled, took her bag, and swiped the key card. Then he pulled her up and brought her into the apartment. Now that they were husband and wife, he treated this place as if it was his own home when he came in again. He carried her to the sofa, where Paging You had been lying. His body hovered above her, and his voice was low. How long has he lived here? He was talking about Paging You. Qin, who was drunk, could hear it, but she pretended not to understand. Her eyes were filled with innocence. Lanyu, what are you talking about? I don't know. He was still pressing her down. His gaze was slightly tense as he stared straight into her eyes. Paging You. He said it word by word, his slender fingers caressing her red lips. He felt that if he wanted to get the truth out of her, he could only do it tonight. Qin blinked. 1 week. Then, before he asked anything else, she said honestly, I took him in because he's good-looking, can cook, and has very good muscles. Lanyu narrowed his eyes. You mean you took a man in mainly because of his masculinity? Chapter 3063. Lanyu felt that it was a little difficult to communicate with her. He coughed and said, What about me? Am I not good-looking? Qin bit her lip and leaned over to look at him. She really wanted to die tonight. The word naive had nothing to do with her before, but she grasped it really well at this time. Lanyu's pupils dilated slightly. Qin kissed his chin and said, You're good-looking too. His heart seemed to have fallen to the ground. It was really a bit embarrassing to fight for favor with a little fresh meat at his age. If Qin hadn't been drunk, he wouldn't have done that. Qin kissed his chin and then kissed his lips. Suddenly, Lanyu thought of a very serious matter. He frowned and held her chin to stop her from moving again. He asked her seriously, Have you kissed him like this before? He clearly knew that she and Paging You were just creating a relationship, but he still cared about it. Qin frowned and thought hard. I think so. This time, Lanyu almost exploded. You let him kiss you? I think I kissed him, she said honestly. Wasn't it normal for a woman who was almost 30 to take advantage of others? Lanyu went crazy. He pinched her chin hard and said in a very direct tone, I think you're tired of living, Mrs. Lan. It's Mrs. Rong. I'm Mrs. Rong. She began to talk nonsense. Lanyu was so angry that he turned his back. He originally thought that she was quite cute when she was drunk, but now he felt even angrier. He let go of her and sat aside. He didn't want to talk to her. He ignored her, but she came to provoke him. She leaned against him and asked softly, Do you like me very much? So you're staying at my house? Lanyu's eyebrows moved. He looked at her face, which was close to him, and the corner of his mouth twitched. Do you know who you're talking to? Lanyu, she said matter-of-factly, still looking at his face. You've been staying at my house all this time, and I can't get rid of you. She looked at herself and suddenly said, Wait a minute. Lanyu looked into her eyes and didn't say anything. She quickly ran back to the bedroom. Lanyu slowly sat down. His mind was blank. After a moment of blankness, he understood that Qin had always remembered him subconsciously. She just didn't want to remember him subconsciously. He was worried that there would be a problem with her memory. She usually seemed fine, but she was a little confused after drinking. He smoked furiously, a little annoyed. Just as he was feeling vexed, Qin came out. She was only wearing a black shirt, and her long hair was tied up. It was beautiful, but what shocked him the most was that this shirt was his. It was the one he had worn that night when he held her on the piano and made love to her. It was also the one in the painting. She still kept it? Perhaps she had left it by accident, but it was still here. The cigarette between Lanyu's fingers trembled, and he almost burned himself. He asked in a hoarse voice, Where did you get this? She didn't answer, but walked over wearing only this damn shirt. She knelt beside him. After a long time, she asked, Did you come here to have sex with me? This was the conversation they had in the past. Now that she said it, he actually felt sour. He suddenly pulled her into his arms, and his face pressed against hers, squeezing so hard that there wasn't a gap. Chapter 3064. His face was still very hot, and he kept pressing against her. She felt a little uncomfortable and wanted to break free, but he was holding her down so forcefully that she couldn't move at all. After a long time, he carried her off the sofa with one hand and walked towards the piano. He placed her on the cover of the piano, tidied her hair, and loosened a button. "I want to paint you." His forehead was against hers, and his voice was hoarse. Qin Chen's slender arms hugged him. "The canvas is in the storage room." Lan Yu's gaze was slightly tense, and then he went to get the tools. She thought that he would paint like this, but he unbuttoned the shirt.
No.
She was drunk, but not so drunk that she didn't know that she couldn't accept such a scale. Her fingers covered her collar, and she bit her lip. "I don't want to do this." But Lan Yu wanted to paint her. He wanted to paint like crazy. He hadn't painted for a very, very long time. He hadn't painted since a few years ago, when he stopped painting at the auction. She was the one who seduced him tonight to paint again. This time, he wanted to paint all of her and only the paintings from his collection. Qin Chen wasn't willing, so he coaxed her and even used his own body to tempt her. Finally, she agreed. She lay down on the expensive piano with her fair and clean body. The entanglement of black and white was the most sophisticated. Every inch of her was perfect, and it made people go crazy. A hint of passion flashed in Lan Yu's eyes. He began to work. Because his right hand had been injured, his painting wasn't perfect, and many lines were distorted. But he drew her charm, and he drew the innocence and shyness in her eyes. That night, he spent 3 hours painting her. When he finished, Qin Chen lay there and fell asleep. The person in his painting was also asleep. Her face was rosy, and her body was relaxed. Even the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. Lan Yu looked at the painting, and his once-dead thoughts came back to life. When he and Qin Chen were together, there were many times when he felt that he was forcing her, and she wasn't happy. But at this moment, he felt that she was actually satisfied and happy. Her happiness was hidden too deeply, belonging to the deepest part of her memory. Lan Yu stood in front of the piano, gently stroking her lips, and smiled. He kissed her and carried her back to the bedroom. In her bed, he was going to kill her. Inch by inch, he wanted her so clearly and deeply. When she woke up, he was kissing her and making love to her. He told her that he was Lan Yu. It was none other than Lan Yu. In her tears, he carved himself into her body and into her soul. Her tipsiness seemed to have receded a lot, and there was some rationality in her eyes. But in the dead of the night, how much sobriety could she maintain? After a night of indulgence, Lan Yu slept a little late. When he woke up, there was no one beside him. He opened his eyes and looked around. There was nothing around him. However, there was a smell of coffee in the air. It was Qin Chen who was making coffee. Lan Yu closed his eyes. He almost thought that he had returned to the past, to the side of the person who loved to drink coffee. He lifted the quilt, got up, walked into the bathroom, and looked at himself in the mirror. His neck and chest were slender scratches. She didn't have this problem in the past. Now, no matter if he was rough or gentle, she liked to scratch him, and especially couldn't stand it. Whenever he touched her, she would get excited. Lan Yu brushed his teeth and thought happily that she was actually a lot more perverted than before, but she didn't want to admit it. It was really a little cute. Chapter 3065. He brushed his teeth and walked out. Qin Chen was indeed making coffee. She was drinking it when he went out. Lan Yu frowned. "You're drinking coffee on an empty stomach?" Qin Chen sipped the coffee in his cup and said lightly, "Nothing. I've been drinking it for many years." He walked over and took her cup. "Don't drink it again." Then he said with disdain, "You always drink coffee. Your teeth will turn yellow, and your kissing won't be perfect." Qin Chen's eyes widened. She almost couldn't believe what he was saying. She had seen shameless people, but she had never seen someone as shameless as him. He seemed to have forgotten the conflict between them. Did he think that everything would go back to how it used to be if they went out for a meal? Qin Chen smiled and sat down on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. "I'll make breakfast for you." Lanyu put the cup back and went to the kitchen to open the fridge. He found some ingredients and made 2 bowls of mushroom chicken noodles. He was very good at cooking. The soup was very rich. Qianchen didn't refuse and quietly finished a bowl. Lanyu finished eating, took out a cigarette, and took a puff. Qianchen looked at him and said, "Sister Quan picked up Venus for me." "Venus?" Lanyu looked at her quietly and asked her slowly, "The kind that only wears 2 pieces of fabric and walks on the stage?" Qianchen poured a glass of water for himself and said lightly, "I've been in a lingerie show before." "You weren't my wife before." Lanyu's expression didn't look good. Qianchen looked at him quietly and said, "You said I could return to the modeling circle. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to let the whole world see my wife." Lanyu was quite insistent on this matter. Qianchen didn't want to pay attention to him. In the modeling circle, lingerie shows were normal. He was simply discriminating against her. There was a moment of silence. The little warmth they had established last night suddenly disappeared. Just when the atmosphere was tense, Lanyu's phone rang. He frowned and took a look. It was a call from one of his servants. After the call was connected, the servant's voice sounded a little panicked. "Sir, the young master fell down and bled a lot." Lanyu narrowed his eyes and said, "Ask the driver to take him to the hospital immediately. Qianchen and I will go there right away." After that, he hurriedly gave a few instructions. Qianchen was also stunned. Then she was a little dazed. Lanyu had already taken the car keys and quickly grabbed her hand. When the door was closed, Qianchen was slightly awake. She looked at him and said with a trembling voice, "Lanyu Rongyu, he'll be fine." Lanyu's voice was firm, but his expression was tense. After getting into the car, he fastened his seatbelt and asked, "What's his blood type?" Qianchen's voice was a little airy. "Type B, then I can give him a blood transfusion," Lanyu said calmly and started the car. He drove very fast and arrived at the hospital in less than 20 minutes. At the same time, Rongyu was also sent by the family's driver. Lanyu directly took him to the emergency room. He had accidentally fallen down the stairs, and there was a lot of blood on his forehead. He didn't know if there were any other injuries. After the emergency room issued the bill, Lanyu carried Xiao Rongyu to the examination. He held him the whole time. Xiao Rongyu was also a little scared. He put his little hand around his neck and whispered, "Will I die?" Lanyu's voice was a little hoarse. "No, I'm here." Chapter 3066. Rongyu pursed his lips and didn't say anything. He just hugged her a little tighter. Lanyu took him to get an X-ray. There was nothing wrong with him, but he had lost too much blood and needed a blood transfusion. Lanyu took 200 cubic centimeters of blood. When the bright red blood seeped into Rongyu's body, Rongyu lay down and asked, "Are you really my father?" Lanyu didn't answer directly. Instead, she reached out and touched his little face. "Are you happy?" she asked in a low voice. Rongyu's eyes were a little cautious. His eyes turned and fell on Qianchen's face. "Mommy," he called softly. Qianchen tried to smile. Her face was even paler than Rongyu's. Rongyu's expression became even more cautious. "Mommy, can I call you Daddy?" He was usually naughty, but he didn't dare to make decisions on his own. He was afraid that his mother would be angry. Qianchen looked at his eager little face and said softly, "Of course." She agreed, but Rongyu didn't say it out loud. His pale little face was dyed with a thin layer of red. It was a mess. Lanyu didn't force him. He just touched his little face. Rongyu gently rubbed against it. Now that he had a father and a mother, he was very happy. After all, he had lost too much blood. Soon, Rongyu was a little sleepy and fell asleep. Qianchen looked at Lanyu's slightly pale face and said softly, "Go over there and lie down. I'll watch over Rongyu." "It's okay." Lanyu's eyes fell on Rongyu's little face. He couldn't bear to look away. He already knew that this was his child, but today, Rongyu knew that he was his father. Lanyu wanted to cry in his heart. There was a kind of indescribable feeling. This kind of feeling was probably the same as how he felt when his father had him. He raised his eyes and looked at Qianchen. "Why didn't you tell me that he was my son earlier?" Qianchen was shocked. Then, she said very slowly, I don't remember. Lan Yu's heart trembled. He looked at her. He thought that she knew that she was pregnant before she lost her memory. At that time, she was going to give birth to his child. Lan Yu's heart was very soft. He didn't say anything and just held her hand. Qinshan wanted to break free, but his grip was too firm. She could only let him be. Until she couldn't bear it anymore, she said, Lan Yu, I want to go to the bathroom. Lan Yu was a little disappointed and reluctantly let go of her. Qinshan heaved a sigh of relief, but after taking 2 steps, he turned his head back and was stunned. Wrong ice, Shin said. Qin say it. Qin, Su. He was very gentle, and his eyes had the unique expression of a loving father. At least, it made Qinshan feel that this marriage was right for little Rongyu. She went into the bathroom and washed her face with cold water. When she came out, Rongyu had already been transfused and was lying quietly. Lan Yu kissed the little guy's hand and said softly, Look after him. I'll make some brown sugar pumpkin porridge for him. Qinshan was not proficient in these things, so she left it to him. The ward was a VIP room with all the facilities, but these things had to be bought in the supermarket outside. Lan Yu took 2 steps and then turned back to Qinshan.
Give me some change.
I left my wallet with you. Qinshan searched herself but couldn't find it. Finally, she said, Pay with your phone. Lan Yu said lightly, I didn't tie it up. Chapter 3067. However, Lan Yu chose to take her phone away and left his own phone. I'll use yours. Call your own phone if you need anything. Before Qinshan could stop him, he left. Qinshan was speechless. The doctor came to check Xiao Rongyu's condition again. Fortunately, everything was fine. After the doctor left, Qinshan was a little bored, so she opened Lan Yu's phone. His phone was probably for personal use. There weren't many phone numbers saved, only a few dozen. The first one was her, a Qinshan. Love Qinshan? Childish. She had completely forgotten how he had treated her in the past, but from the photos on his phone, it seemed like they had a very good time in the past. Qinshan looked at those photos as if she was looking at another person. She couldn't be immersed in it at all, and didn't think that it was her. She looked at the person in the photo, and it was very strange. She was such a feminine person, but she was once so masculine. No, it was not masculine, it was a man. Qinshan continued to scroll through the photos, looking at her and Lan Yu in the photos. Some intimate photos, she felt that it was a little painful to the eyes. It was clearly 2 men, but Lan Yu could also kiss a man. Qinshan deleted all the photos on his phone. She felt that since it was her, she had the right to do so. Lan Yu came back half an hour later. After seeing Xiao Rongyu, he made porridge for him. Qinshan changed the phone back. After a while, Lan Yu came over and asked, You deleted the photos? Yes, I deleted them. They were a little ugly, Qinshan said with concern.
For a long time, he didn't speak.
She couldn't help but ask him, What's wrong? Nothing. His voice became even fainter, and then he walked into the kitchen. Qinshan snorted and didn't care. However, no matter how much she didn't care, she couldn't ignore the fact that he was cold to her. After Xiao Rongyu woke up, his eyes fell on Xiao Rongyu, and he didn't look at her. Qinshan was a little angry. Why was he angry at her now? However, in front of the children, the adults would not quarrel. He quietly fed the little fellow porridge. Qinshan raised his hand to check the time. I'm going to buy lunch. Lan Yu suddenly said, Qinshan, do you still remember the fried chicken you used to eat? Qinshan froze for a moment. Lan Yu continued, He probably doesn't remember. Let's just buy something. Qinshan felt that he was really a little weird. It was probably menopause. Seriously, when he slept with a woman, he clearly had the body of a 20-year-old, but when he argued, he was a 50-year-old uncle. Of course, she ignored him and went to buy his least favorite dishes, wanting to disgust him a little. The moment Lan Yu opened his lunchbox, his face turned green. Little Rongyu knew that he didn't like to eat this. He looked at him nervously and asked, Dad, you don't like it? Lan Yu changed his expression and smiled faintly. I like it. I like everything your mother bought. You don't mean it. Little Rongyu stuck out his tongue. Lan Yu was angry in his heart, but seeing that the little fellow was better, his mood also improved. He reached out and rubbed his head. We'll go home in the afternoon. Xiao Rongyu was very happy, but Qin Chun was a little neglected. It didn't feel good. In the afternoon, the doctor checked Xiao Rongyu and confirmed that he could be discharged. Lan Yu carried him out, and Xiao Rongyu was very happy. Chapter 30:68. Lan Yu was sitting in the driver's seat. He looked at Qin Chun through the rearview mirror and said, "Accidentally fell down and bled a little." "It's nothing." Mr. Lan was angry. "What do you mean by it's nothing? Don't you feel pain when you didn't break your head?" Mr. Lan had forgotten about his son after he had a grandson. He said angrily, "I'll be right there." "Which hospital are you in?" Lan Yu said helplessly, "I'm out of the hospital. I'll be right there." "Okay, I'll be right there." Mr. Lan was determined. Lan Yu hung up the phone and started the car without saying anything. When he returned to the villa, Father Lan was already there. He hugged his precious grandson and gave him a good hug. Then, he scolded Lan Yu and Qin Chun. In the end, he asked, "The child fell down. Where are you?" Lan Yu rubbed his nose and said slowly, "Qin Chun and I are not at home." Father Lan was also an experienced person. When he heard this, how could he not understand? He was going to have fun. His poor eldest grandson. His parents wanted to have fun, so they left him at home. They were really heartless. Father Lan was so anxious that he even spouted out the heartless words. Mr. Lan thought about it carefully and decided to bring Rongyu to his side. Qin Chun wanted to say something, but Lan Yu said it first. "Dad, I'll send Rongyu to your place after he recovers. However, he has to go to kindergarten in the fall. Qin Chun and I still have to bring him back." Mr. Lan still accepted this point, so he went back after having a meal here. After Mr. Lan left, Lan Yu pulled the collar of his shirt and asked the servant, "Where's your wife?" "She's upstairs with the young master," the servant said respectfully. Lan Yu nodded. He took off his coat and walked upstairs slowly. He pushed open the door of the children's room and walked in. Qin Chun was looking after Rongyu with a gentle look. "Are you asleep?" He walked over and sat beside little Rongyu as he asked softly. Qin Chun grunted in acknowledgement, but he didn't look away. Lan Yu grabbed her hand. "Go to sleep. I'll keep watch." Qin Chun wanted to break free, but he couldn't. Instead, he was restrained by him. "Let go." Her voice was very low as she was afraid of waking Rongyu up. Lan Yu looked at her and said in a low voice, "Chun Chun, weren't we on good terms before? Last night was wonderful. I'm so happy." He reached out and gently ruffled her hair. "Isn't it good if we do that forever?" "I was drunk last night," Qin Chun said calmly. "That was just an illusion." Lan Yu narrowed his eyes. "So the pleasure you felt was also an illusion? You lying under me and telling me to hit harder was also an act?" Qin Chun clenched his teeth. "If you forget this, I have a recording here. You can listen to it." Lan Yu kindly played the recording for her. Qin Chun snatched it and glared at him. "You're crazy. Rongyu will hear it. He was made like this. Is there a problem?" Lan Yu said shamelessly. Qin Chun turned his head away and took his phone back to the master bedroom. She did open it, but she couldn't find the recording he mentioned. It meant that she had been fooled by him, but she felt that there was something wrong with his strange behavior. Sure enough, he returned to the room after a while. He threw his coat beside her and lay on the soft bed. Qin Chun looked at him. "Why did you lie to me? Why did you delete the photos?" Lan Yu covered his eyes with his hand. "Chun Chun, do you think that you are qualified to delete those photos because they are you? But do you really think that you are Qin Chun in your heart?" With that, he moved his hand away and looked at her quietly. Her heart was squeezed hard, but she didn't say anything. Lan Yu smiled faintly. "You are not.
You have not been her for a long time."
He covered his eyes again, as if he didn't want to see her. He was still angry. Qin Chun knelt beside him and looked at him for a long time. Then she asked, "What about you? You said you love me. Then tell me, do you love the old me or the current me? Would you believe me if I said I love both?" Lanyu smiled bitterly. You won't believe me. You will think that I am a bastard because you have sacrificed so much, and I have always treated you like this. He reached out slowly, held her hand, and gently pulled her into his arms. His face was close to hers, and he said softly and slowly, Chun-Chun, I have never touched them. Really, not even once. Chapter 3069. The kiss was full of pain. Then he opened his eyes and looked at her. Qin Chen's eyes reflected his. At this moment it was a little touching. Her fingers gently touched him, and she murmured, Lanyu, you haven't answered my question. I've said it before. I like both of you because in my heart, you are the same person, but you don't think so. He closed his eyes slightly. Chun-Chun, Huang Xia said that you love me, but we separated in such a hurry. At that time, I hated you. Even now, it doesn't feel real. He showed weakness and then hugged her tightly in his arms, as if he was afraid of losing her again. Qin Chen's face was pressed against his neck, and she asked in a low voice, Are you very angry? Because I deleted the photos? He murmured in a low voice. She frowned. But I think it's so ugly. It's very embarrassing. So, no matter how angry you are, I still have to delete it. Her voice was a little childish. Lanyu pulled her face and looked at it, frowning. You think it's ugly? Yes, it's very ugly. She flipped her hair. I like my current appearance. Lanyu looked at her for a long time and suddenly laughed. He was a little surprised. Qin Chen actually hated the way she used to be. Then he let go of her and snorted. You used to admire your own appearance. Oh, I forgot to tell you. You used to work in Shenyuan, and a group of nurses liked you and chased after you. Just thinking about it made Qin Chen feel a little disgusted. She felt that Lanyu was talking about a horror movie. After staring at him for a long time, he nodded at her. It's true. Fortunately, the photos were deleted. Qin Chen felt that she had done the right thing. Lanyu held her waist with one hand and took out his phone from his pocket with the other. He played with it a few times and said calmly, Fortunately, the photos can still be found after Apple deleted them. After a few times, her photos were restored. Qin Chen was infuriated. She stared at his photo for a long time before looking at it again. Lanyu, then why are you so angry? The ritual of quarreling, Mrs. Lan? He kissed her hair to make it up. Qin Chen was still staring at him. His gaze softened as he kissed her eyes, her nose, and her lips bit by bit. Little by little, he kissed her gently in the end. After a long time, he whispered against her lips, Qin Chen, you were drunk last night, but you're not drunk now. He only said half of the sentence, but she understood what he wanted, so she murmured, So, do it once to prove that we've been together. His fingers stroked her red lips. Prove that what happened last night wasn't an illusion. Qin Chen pulled his hand away. You're very greedy. Yes, I am greedy, but I am greedy because I love you. He turned over and buried his face in her hair. He took a deep breath. Chun-Chun, tell me you love me. Qin Chen smiled helplessly. But Lanyu, I really don't have such a mood now. I'm sorry. He stared at her and pinched her chin with his fingers. Mrs. Lan, you can't be so honest. This is one of my strengths. She was still smiling, but she refused his proposal. I want to see Rongyu. Chapter 3070. Qin Chen pressed him down and said, Let me go.
You just had your blood taken today.
Is that considered concern, Mrs. Lan? His eyes were a little clear and a little flirtatious. Qin Chen sat up and flipped his long hair. You think too much, Mr. Lan. Lanyu smiled and let her leave. However, he still grabbed her hand when she got off the bed and whispered, Sleep with Rongyu for a while. Don't stay up like this. They had been playing for a whole night last night. She would also be tired. Qin Chen looked into his eyes and nodded before walking out. Lanyu lay down alone, but he was a little excited because his relationship with her had eased. The more he lay down, the more he couldn't fall asleep. In the end, he sat up and secretly went to the children's room to see Qin Chen and Rongyu. He said that he was going to see his son, but he stared at his son's mother for a long time. Little Romeo woke up. He blinked his eyes and called out softly, "Dad." His little face was a little shy because he saw that his father was looking at his mother very gently. His father must love his mother very much to show such a look. Lonyu made a gesture and then moved to the other side. Little Romeo also turned over, and the two of them lay face to face. "Dad." The little guy called out sweetly again. Lonyu reached out and touched his hair. He whispered, "How did you fall?" Little Romeo was a little embarrassed and didn't want to say it. Lonyu smiled faintly and patted his little head.
You can tell me.
"I promise I won't tell anyone." "Really?" "Pinky swear." Little Romeo said in a low voice. Lonyu smiled. "I promise." The little guy was usually very naughty and sharp-tongued. However, he was still a child after all, and he was also injured. He seemed particularly delicate and soft. He immediately nestled in Lonyu's arms and said softly, "I had a dream. I dreamed that my mother didn't want us anymore. When I woke up, I looked for her. She wasn't there, so I ran downstairs." As little Romeo spoke, he even peed. Lonyu was both angry and happy at the same time. "If you can't find your mother, you can ask the servants at home." Xiao Romeo stopped talking. Lonyu reached out and rubbed his little head to comfort him. After a while, little Romeo asked in a low voice, "Daddy, are you and Mommy together forever? Mom won't fly out again?" "Don't you like Mommy flying out?" Lonyu asked gently. Romeo's little face was a little disappointed. "I hope that Mummy will always be with me, but everyone says that I'm the smartest child, so I'm too embarrassed to bring it up. I'll be laughed at." Lonyu burst into laughter. How could such a young child care so much about face? In this aspect, he seemed to be very similar to him. He thought about it and hesitated for a moment before saying, "After this year, Daddy will try to talk to Mommy and let her stay at home all the time, okay?" Xiao Rongyu nodded obediently. Lonyu's heart softened. He never dared to think that he could have a son, especially with Qin. Moreover, he was born under such circumstances. He wanted to know a lot of things, but Qin had forgotten. He would rather keep it a secret than force her to remember. It was not easy for her to come back. In his heart, he felt guilty towards her. He wanted to make it up to her, even though she still had the ability to make him angry. Lonyu smiled slightly and carefully held the little guy in his arms. "Go to sleep. Daddy is sleepy too." Chapter 30:71. However, Xiao Rongyu did not know that. He suddenly became energetic. "Daddy, I want to listen to stories. I want to go out and play." Lonyu thought, should this kid go back into Qin-chen's stomach and wait for a few years for another child to come out? Of course, Xiao Rongyu's body did not allow him to go out and play. However, Lonyu told him stories for an hour. He was very tired. It was even more tiring than doing it with Qin-chen for the whole night. Of course, the fun was different. Lonyu fell asleep. However, Xiao Rongyu's eyes were still wide open. He looked at this and that with a blissful expression on his face. He recuperated at home for a few days, and his wound was completely healed. When Papa Lon came to pick Xiao Rongyu up, he was reluctant. Papa Lon squatted down and looked at his eldest grandson. He said softly, "Do you want Daddy and Mommy to give you a younger brother or sisters?" Xiao Rongyu's eyes lit up. "A younger brother or sister?"
"Yes."
"That's why Daddy and Mommy have to focus on making babies. If you're by the side, you won't have a younger brother or sister," Papa Lon said straightforwardly. Xiao Rongyu looked at him curiously.
"Why?"
Papa Lon coughed. "It'll be inconvenient. But I've been sleeping with Daddy and Mommy these few days. I didn't disturb them. One night, when I woke up, Daddy was lying on Mommy's body. Mommy kept crying," Xiao Rongyu said innocently. Papa Lan's expression was a little interesting. He scolded his son in his heart. Initially, he sympathized with him and endured it. However, he felt that Lonyu was simply a beast. He wouldn't even let go of his child. In order to prevent his grandson from being poisoned, Papa Lon felt that he had to take this eldest grandson away. At least, he couldn't let him go before school started. Of course, Papa Lon scolded Lan Yu when he saw him. He was probably shameless. Why couldn't he control himself? Lan Yu's reason was very good. Dad, I've endured it for too long. A man will go bad if he holds it in for too long. Papa Lon jumped up. Don't give me that. I haven't gone bad for so long. Lan Yu smiled. Dad, you still have that? Papa Lon blushed. I'm only in my early 60s. Papa Lon was a little sad. Xiao Yu hugged him and rubbed against him. Father Lon was a little sad. At this moment, Xiao Yu hugged his leg and rubbed against it. Father Lon lowered his head and looked at the little guy. He was in a good mood and smiled. He carried his grandson and walked outside. As he walked, he said, If you have the ability, give me a baby. Don't talk nonsense all day.
And,
Daddy, I have to about you.
to Chin to. Lon. You. I have.
Chin Zhao's. You. Mu.
Lon to.
Lan Yu.
Not. A.
R Xiao. Lan.
Not.
Lan. He was old, and his only hope in this life was that Lan Yu could give him another cute little granddaughter. Thinking about it, little Rongyu was about to go to school, and he couldn't play anymore. If Lan Yu didn't give him a little one, he would be very bored. Father Lon took the little fellow, dragged his suitcase, got into the car, and left. Chen came downstairs and frowned. Lan Yu, you agreed? Chapter 3072. It was mainly because Xiao Rongyu hadn't grown up with him. If he had grown up by his side, Lan Yu's parenting philosophy would have been different. He looked at Qin Chen and smiled. Dad is doing this for our own good. Us. Qin Chen looked at him with a puzzled expression. Lan Yu put his hand on her shoulder and coughed. It's like this. Dad thinks we should have another child. It's best if it's a daughter. Qin Chen frowned. When you proposed to get married, you didn't say you wanted to have another child. I don't want to have one, she said in the end. Lan Yu smiled. But it's different now. He held her in his arms. I want a daughter like you. You're bored. Qin Chen sneered. Lan Yu, I said you don't have to say what you want to say next. Lan Yu grabbed her hand and very seriously led her upstairs. Qin Chen broke free from him. What are you doing? Giving birth to a child. My dad said I'm just shooting blanks. Lan Yu looked serious. However, Qin Chen was furious. She frowned and looked at him. I'll have a job later. Stop fooling around. We're going to get married. What job do you have? Lan Yu said unhappily. Qin Chen looked at him and pursed his lips. I'm going to shoot a commercial. I'll go with you, he said without thinking. Qin Chen reminded him. You have to go to Sea City. Sea City? Cece was in Sea City now, and Gu Zhe was married to her. A secret marriage. Cece was banished to Sea City, and Gu Zhe went to Sea City once a week. It seemed to be a blessing, but Lan Yu never felt that it was a kind of happiness. He felt that living a simple and pure life was what Cece should be. After seeing Cece's clear eyes, he had sworn to protect her for the rest of his life, but he broke his promise. He had underestimated the power of love. One Gu Zhe was enough to make her return to the dust. Lan Yu was reluctant, but he couldn't bear to see her. He was afraid that she wasn't living well, and he was afraid that Gu Zhe wouldn't treat her well. He was silent. Qin Chen asked, What are you thinking about? He looked at her.
Cece.
Qin Chen's expression changed slightly. Lan Yu held her hand. Cece and Gu Zhe are married. She was arranged to stay in Sea City. The word arrange made Qin Chen's eyebrows loosen. He subconsciously asked, Why did Lin Cece's parents agree to it? This is clearly an unequal marriage. Cece likes it, Lan Yu said, holding Qin Chen's hand. Come with me to see her. Qin Chen looked at him and said slowly, She wouldn't want to see me, would she? Lan Yu smiled. Of course not. As he said that, he reached out and stroked her hair. That's settled. I'll go to the study to deal with some business. Let's go to Sea City together tomorrow. Qin Chen smiled a little reluctantly. When he turned around to leave, he added, "Let's leave the baby making for tonight. I have a show to do in autumn and winter. Do you want me to do the show with a pregnant belly?" Chen looked at him. Lanyu smiled and didn't say anything. Chen didn't realize that she wasn't against pregnancy. She just wanted to finish the show. So that night, he took the initiative to use T-City. When he lowered his body, she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Don't you want a daughter?" Lanyu kissed the corner of her mouth as he did it. His voice was low and husky. "If you want it, I'll get rid of it." Chen gritted his teeth. "You know." Chapter 30:73. Chen's body trembled. In the end, he still succeeded. Lanyu had a good time. It was probably too rough, so Chen ignored him for a long time. Of course, Lanyu coaxed him for a whole night. Early the next morning, Chen got up early and went to the locker room to pack his luggage. When Lanyu woke up, there was nothing. Then, he heard a slight sound coming from the locker room. He smiled faintly, got up and opened the door. Chen was sorting out her clothes and putting them into the suitcase one by one. After she was done, she straightened up and looked up to see Lanyu. Then she opened the cabinet to see if there was anything else she wanted to bring. Lanyu hugged her from behind, buried his face in her hair, and said in a low voice, Chen, help me pack up." "Huh? Pack up yourself. I'm not your babysitter." Chen snorted softly. Lanyu hugged her from behind, bit her neck, and said in a low voice, "I exhausted myself last night, Mrs. Lan." Chen's face was a little red. She stared at him and struggled to break away. He was really holding her too tightly. "Let me go, I'll help you pack up." She gave in. However, the shameless man still hugged her and said in a low voice, Chen, I'm sorry for what happened last time." Then he buried his face in her hair. "I was just afraid that you would leave like before. I was very angry at that time." His palm tightened, and he hugged her tighter, holding her in his arms. Chen's heart was a little soft. She tilted her head and said, "Lanyu?" He smiled bitterly and pressed his face against her. "I know you still blame me. You can't get over it. You married me just for Rongyu, but Chen, I want you to know that I will be a good husband and father." Lanyu said in a low voice. He didn't want her to answer, and kept hugging her. After a long time, Chen whispered, "Didn't you ask me to pack for you? How am I supposed to pack when you're hugging me like this?" Lanyu smiled faintly and let go of her. He walked to the closet and pulled out a shirt and pants. He also took off his bathrobe in front of her. Chen closed his eyes. He smiled sheepishly. "She's not a little girl anymore. You've seen her so many times already. Why are you making such a fuss?" He said meaningfully, "You used to be very bold and unrestrained." "Nonsense." Chen snorted and glanced at him. Then he helped him pack his luggage. He only packed a few shirts and trousers. Lanyu chuckled. "Have you prepared any underwear?" As he said this, he took out a few black bullet-shaped ones. "Your favorite." Chen helped him put them into the suitcase. She snorted coldly. "You're the one who's hot on the inside."
Don't blame it on me.
"I'm hot on the inside because of you," he said naturally. Then he smiled and tidied up his clothes. He carried the luggage downstairs and asked Chen to pack up and go downstairs to have breakfast with him. When they had breakfast together, with 2 suitcases, the servants at home felt that the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Gu had become better. They were very harmonious, and they couldn't stop smiling. Chen said hesitantly while eating breakfast, "Lanyu, I want to discuss something with you." Lanyu looked at her. "Go ahead." Chapter 30:74. Lanyu finished the milk in the cup and smiled. Chen, do you think I'm your blood bank?"
No.
She whispered. "How about I take him with me?" Lanyu put his hand on the back of her hand and said calmly, Chen, you're too nervous. Moreover, little Romu's blood type isn't rare, so it's not that dangerous. It's only a 2-hour drive from C City to B City. If something happens to Cheng Yi, I can call a helicopter, and we'll be there in half an hour. Chen looked down and said nothing. Lan Yu rubbed her hand and smiled. Chen, I will wait for you in the car. In fact, he wanted to smoke. He felt that Chen did not feel safe in her heart. Perhaps she did not regard him as a dependence in her heart. He did not force her, but dealt with it calmly. After putting the suitcase away, he sat in the car and smoked quietly. When he smoked the third cigarette, Chen got in the car. She sat next to him, buckled the seatbelt, and looked at him. Are you really going to go with me? Lan Yu put out the cigarette butt and said, I have contacted Sister Quan. By the way, I have upgraded your hotel to a presidential suite. Chen was a little angry. If you do this, others will say that I am arrogant. Don't you usually act arrogant? Lan Yu put on his sunglasses and started the car. Chen was a little restrained and did not say anything. However, when she arrived at the hotel, Lan Yu did not restrain himself, because he saw the toy boy, Pei Jingyu. When he saw him, Pei Jingyu was sitting on the sofa in the lobby of the hotel, wearing sunglasses on his delicate face. He was wearing a pair of white pants and a black and white striped t-shirt, which was obviously a standard casual dress. Lan Yu looked at him, then looked at his wife and asked in a low voice, Can you explain? Are you here to shoot a commercial, or to meet your toy boy? Chen glared at him and threw the luggage at his feet. Whatever you think. She was so rude that Lan Yu was a little angry. Mrs. Lan, watch your attitude. He looked very much like a jealous husband or a husband caught in the act of adultery. Chen snorted and said, What kind of attitude do you want? Should he admit his mistake, or cry and beg for forgiveness? This is my job, Lan Yu. If you're not happy, you can leave. You didn't tell me that you were filming a commercial with a gigolo, Mr. Lan insisted. Chen crossed his arms in front of him. His name is Pei Jingyu, not a gigolo. Besides, I don't need your permission to cooperate with anyone, Mr. Lan. Besides, I didn't say anything when you came to see Lin Cece. It's because you don't love me that you don't care, right? His gaze fell on her face, his eyes filled with heartache. Chen's breath stopped. Lan Yu, if you want to quarrel, go ahead, but I won't accompany you. She really felt that she had married a madman. He could be tender and sweet in the morning, but now he was like this. At this moment, Chen hoped that he would explode on the spot. Lan Yu's face darkened. Are you really going to ignore my feelings for a gigolo? You're being unreasonable. Chen pulled his suitcase and walked to the front desk. Give me a room. She couldn't stand living with a man who was in menopause. Pei Jingyu came over at this time and smiled. Did you quarrel? Do you want to squeeze with me? I have an executive suite. We can have one room each. Chapter 30:75. I don't care. Pei Jingyu smiled, but he saw Lan Yu walking over. He was very jealous. Pei Jingyu smiled and took a step back. I won't bother you anymore. See you on set in the afternoon. Chen also smiled at him and then continued to register. The pen in his hand was rudely snatched away, and Lan Yu said to the receptionist, Room 2118. The receptionist's eyes lit up. He was a guest in the presidential suite, and he was unreasonably handsome. So she smiled and handed over the room card. Sir, please call us if you need anything. Lan Yu said very rudely, Thank you, but I brought my wife. I'll look for her if I need anything. Chen was infuriated. Lan Yu took her hand and went to the suite. As soon as he put down the luggage, he began to interrogate her. What's your relationship with Pei Jingyu? Chen's eyes fell on her face, and he pursed his lips. Whatever relationship you think it is. Lan Yu's expression was a little bad. Chen chuckled. You don't believe me when I say it's a normal relationship, so it's up to you whether you believe me or not. If you don't believe me, you'll feel bad. It has nothing to do with me. As soon as she finished speaking, he picked her up and lifted her very high. She put her hand on his shoulder and hammered him. Lan Yu, what are you doing? Are you crazy? What do you want? The next second, she was thrown onto the luxurious bed, and his body immediately pressed down on her. Chen raised his head to look at his face. He was probably in a bad mood, so he didn't do anything to her. He just looked at her with his deep eyes. After a long time, he said, Chen, you're not alone. Even if you help paging you, there's a limit. Chen turned his face away. The company arranged it. The company arranged it, so you just followed it. Or are you deliberately trying to piss me off? Lanyu pinched her face and said in a gentle voice, I did. A sky-high penalty fee, CEO Lan. Chen said helplessly, you have to think about me. I'll pay for it. Lanyu sat up and was about to call Chen. Chen stopped him. She hugged his waist from behind and said in a low voice, Lanyu, don't. His hand stopped and he murmured, Chen, why? Give me a reason. Just work. Don't make a fuss about it, she murmured behind him. I promise there won't be any kissing scene. Are you sure? His voice was hoarse. Chen nodded. I promise. Lanyu didn't say anything more. He reached out and pulled her into his arms from behind. He lowered his head and kissed her for a while. Then he said in a low voice, take a break. I'll take you to lunch at noon. Chen blinked. Did he agree? Lanyu pursed his lips and didn't say anything else. He just lay flat. After a while, Chen gently leaned into his arms. She didn't say anything and just leaned against him. Lanyu's voice sounded quietly. Don't think that I'll forgive you just like that. She put her hand flat on his chest and looked up at his handsome face. She chuckled. Actually, I didn't ask for your forgiveness. Lanyu narrowed his eyes and stared at her. Chen was still smiling, and then she buried her face. There was a sense of joy after teasing someone. Chapter 3076. Lanyu looked down at her. What are you laughing at? I suddenly feel that you are very stupid, she said honestly. Lanyu looked at her again and reached out to rub her soft long hair without saying anything. After a while, just as Chen was about to fall asleep, Lanyu suddenly said, we agreed that there would be no kissing scenes. There was a trace of grievance in his voice. Chen suddenly felt that it was funny. She smiled and leaned against his chest. I promise. However, it turned out that her promise was nothing. At noon, they got up and had lunch together. Lanyu personally sent her to the set. Sister Quan was there too. She probably knew that Lanyu was coming, so she specially came over to avoid trouble. Her assistant, Xiao Hong, also came over and waited on Chen to the makeup room. Sister Quan and Lanyu exchanged some pleasantries. At this time, Paging Yu came over. He was wearing a bathrobe. It was always very beautiful to see youth and flesh. Lanyu frowned. What kind of advertisement is this? Does it need to be shot like this? He also saw a prop, a bathtub. It's a shower gel. But President Lan, don't worry. All the staff will be there during the whole process. There won't be any naked scenes. At most, Chen will stand up from the bathtub. Sister Quan comforted him, but she was not optimistic. Lanyu frowned. You mean standing up from the bathtub in a bathrobe? Was there any difference between that and not wearing clothes? His wife was going to be naked in front of the whole world? This was something that Lanyu couldn't accept. Let me see the script. He frowned. Sister Quan sighed in her heart. Go and get it. When she got it, Lanyu glanced through it and then said coldly, there will be a kissing scene? Damn it. How did that woman lie to him this morning? She promised that there would be no kissing scene. Now it was written in black and white. Sister Quan was afraid that he would misunderstand, so she quickly explained, it's a fake scene. Don't worry, President Lan. In fact, Sister Quan was having a mental breakdown. Which female artist hadn't done a kissing scene before? It was all real, not to mention that it was just a fake scene. It wasn't a big deal to come out of the water wearing a bathrobe. A thicker one wouldn't expose you. Besides, Chen's underwear had been to many shows. Even if Boss Lan wanted to haggle over it now, he wouldn't be able to do it. Sister Quan thought to herself. Then, Lanyu started to edit the script. Of course, he would not change it. Instead, he immediately called a senior screenwriter over. The face of the director of the commercial turned green. How could they continue filming this commercial? The changes were so unattractive. Even if the commercial went in, there wouldn't be any splashes. The director was having a headache, but he did not dare to offend CEO Lan. When Qin Chen came out, she looked at the script and her face turned green. Lan Yu, you're so lame. This is my job. She thought that they had already communicated with each other, but he was still so unreasonable. She simply didn't want to deal with him. Qin Chen's temper was not to be trifled with. She looked at Lan Yu and said, if you continue to be like this, there's no need for our marriage to exist anymore. Lan Yu snorted, do you think I can just watch you and that pretty boy get married? Qin Chen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lan Yu, can you be a little more reasonable? He snorted softly, there's no way to be reasonable. Chapter 30:77. Lan Yu looked at her and said, Qin Chen, are you serious? Qin Chen nodded and said, yes. Lan Yu sighed and said, okay, I'll go see her. In fact, if he were to watch Qin Chen and the gigolo kissing each other, he would really suffer from internal injuries, and he didn't want to die young. Of course, he was angry, but he also knew that if he continued to make things difficult for her, Qin Chen would explode. This time, he cherished their reconciliation a lot more than last time. Although he shouted fiercely, he didn't dare to do anything to her. Lan Yu's concession was unbelievable in everyone's eyes. After all, he had asked to change the script just now. But although it was unbelievable, the director and Sister Quan were relieved that they had finally sent him off. After Lan Yu left, Pei Jingyu came over and said, Sister Qin Chen, how did you convince him? I won him over by virtue. Qin Chen forced a fake smile and said, let's shoot the commercial. Pei Jingyu cooperated with the director's request and whispered, you fell in love with him and decided to manage your marriage? That doesn't seem like your style. Qin Chen smiled faintly and said, people's minds change, don't they? A trace of coldness flashed across Pei Jingyu's eyes. It seemed that Qin Chen had really decided to live well with Lan Yu. Women were always soft-hearted, and Qin Chen was no exception. While the commercial was being filmed, Lan Yu got into his car. Before starting the car, he called Qin Chen. The content was quite childish. It was nothing more than not allowing her to do the kissing scene. At most, she would fake the scene, and he would watch it carefully. Don't try to lie to me. Qin Chen was speechless and hung up, but when they were filming the kissing scene, she really couldn't kiss Pei Jingyu's handsome face anymore. It was probably because Lan Yu's words had a certain deterrent effect on her. Qin Chen laughed. Pei Jingyu looked at her and laughed, but only he knew that his laughter was different from Qin Chen's. Qin Chen felt sad because he thought of Lan Yu, and he felt sad because of bitterness. On the other side, Lan Yu hung up and started the car. It took about an hour to drive from the set to Lin Cici's villa. When Lan Yu arrived, it was almost evening. The black carved door was closed. Lan Yu got out of the car and greeted the guard. The guard immediately said, I have to ask Mr. Gu. Lan Yu took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a puff and wanted to slap Gu Zhe to death. Looking around, it was a high-end villa area, but how far was it from C City and B City? Was it really okay for Cici to stay here and not interact with others? Gu Zhe came once a week. Other than physical interaction, what else could he do? Lan Yu knew how busy a person like Gu Zhe was. He was definitely no less busy than himself. It was already good enough that he took 1 day a week. It was absolutely impossible for him to come and talk about love. In the long run, what would Cici become? To put it nicely, she would be his wife. To put it bluntly, was there any difference between her and a rich man's woman outside? No, there was. Women outside would still make trouble, but Cici wouldn't. When there was a problem, she would probably hide and cry secretly. No matter how angry Lan Yu was, he had to wait for Gu Zhe's reply. After hanging up the phone, the guard became respectful and said with a smile, Mr. Lan, I'm sorry. Mr. Gu said you can go in. Lan Yu cursed under his breath, got into the car, and drove into the villa. He opened the car door and took out a lot of food from the trunk. It was for Cici. Chapter 78. Lanyu walked into the hall. The hall was very grand. It should be said that the entire villa was grand inside and out. But there was no human touch. Because there was no male owner here. The male owner only came back occasionally. Sometimes, when he was busy on the weekends or on a business trip, Guze probably didn't have time to care about this place. As for Cece, she could only keep waiting. Lanyu's feelings were complicated. Cece was like a sister to him, or even a daughter. But now, she had to exhaust her incomplete life to wait for someone who might not be able to accompany her to the end. Lanyu really wasn't sure if he had been wrong back then. Had he agreed too easily? If he hadn't agreed, Cece might not have been so stubborn. He knew that Cece's parents didn't interact much with Cece. It wasn't because they didn't want to see Cece, but because they were worried about Guze. Guze was a reputable figure. If he had anything to do with a family that had just stepped down, it would definitely affect him. Lanyu's heart was a little cold. He stopped in his tracks and saw Cece. Cece was sitting on the sofa with an Annie, who was teaching her how to knit. There was a faint and satisfied smile on Cece's little face. Lanyu thought that perhaps Cece was happy with this kind of life because she was looking forward to it. But even so, he still couldn't bear it. Lanyu called Cece's name softly. Cece looked up. Guze. When she saw that it was Lanyu, she quickly ran over and jumped to hug Lanyu. Why are you here? I'm so happy that you're here. She was incoherent, but she was extremely cute. Lanyu could feel her happiness and couldn't help hugging her and spinning her around. You seem to have lost weight. When he put her down, Cece puffed up her cheeks. Because I missed you. Her gaze was a little timid. Brother Lan, are you still angry? Lanyu felt sour and bitter. This little fool could actually remember that he was angry. How could he be angry at her now? Lanyu smiled and pointed at the things on the side. These are for you. She was a foodie after all. She immediately went to have a look and even opened a packet to eat. Her face was full of satisfaction. Lanyu smiled and walked to the sofa to pick up the sweater she had knitted. It was quite ugly. The auntie said with a smile, "It's for Mr. Gu. I'll go get you some water." The auntie had been here for a long time and knew that only people close to Mr. Gu could enter. Judging from Cece's appearance, she was probably very familiar with him. Speaking of Cece, Annie felt that it was quite a pity. She was so pretty, but why was her brain so bad? She was cute, but Sir never allowed her to get pregnant. He probably had other plans. The Annie went to pour some water. Lanyu looked at it for a long time and smiled faintly. Cece, knit one for me one day. Okay?
Sure.
Cece held the snacks in her arms and nibbled on them like a little mouse. She peeked at him and said, "But you have to bring me something delicious." Lanyu laughed. At this moment, the auntie came over with a cup of good tea. Lanyu wasn't in the mood to drink it. He just kept Cece company. She looked very happy, very happy. Lanyu couldn't help but ask the auntie beside him, "Did Cece's parents come?" The auntie was stunned, and then sighed. They rarely come. They only see each other once in 2 or 3 months. They seem to be very wary of Mr. Gu. Lanyu knew about this, but he thought that it wasn't the only reason. The main reason was that Guze didn't like others to accept Cece. Chapter 79. After the auntie finished speaking, Lanyu's heart felt even worse. He looked at Cece, and Cece tried her best to give him a smile. That smile made him feel very sad. She seemed very sensible, but careful. As Lanyu looked at her, the little fool ran over and leaned on the floor beside him, continuing to eat snacks. She and Lanyu were used to fooling around, so she was not surprised. But that did not mean that Guze would be happy to see it. Guze magically appeared in the villa, unlike the usual weekend exceptions. The black limousine stopped at the parking lot outside, and Guze slowly got out of the car, carrying a few boxes of delicious food in his hands. Passing through the door, he saw his little wife, leaning on Lanyu. Lanyu was stroking her little head, and his little fool was smiling contentedly. She squinted her eyes and smiled at Lanyu, looking very happy. Guzé stopped in his tracks. He looked straight at her little face and suddenly remembered that she had not smiled so happily for a long time. She used to say that she liked him very much and that she liked to be with him, so when he said marriage, the little fool agreed. After getting married, she was happy for a long time, but slowly, she stopped smiling and always looked at him with a cautious gaze. Of course, she still liked him, but this liking became very conservative. She had always been a little scheming, and he always thought that these little scheming were very cute. But when a husband realized that his wife only smiled at other men, he did not think that she was cute anymore. It was a little hateful. Guzé stood there, gently unbuttoning his suit, took off his coat, and put it on his arm, waiting for her to notice him. Lin Cece only noticed him after a minute, and the smile on her face disappeared. Guzé saw a hint of panic in her eyes, and then she stood up. "You're back." Guzé handed his coat to the servant beside him and opened his arms. Lin Cece hesitated for a moment, then ran over and hugged him. Guzé kissed her forehead and asked gently, "Have you been good?" His little fool nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes, if you don't believe me, you can ask Auntie." As she spoke, she winked at the ant. Guzé actually saw it, but he pretended not to see it. He just let go of her and sat on the sofa. "I brought your favorite osmanthus cake." After saying that, he looked forward to seeing her happy face. However, Lin Cece didn't look happy at all. Instead, she said very slowly, "Lanyu brought me some too. I'm already full."
Guzé looked at Lanyu.
He was a man, so he naturally wouldn't fuss over such a small matter. He only said indifferently, "Then leave it for later." The little fool happily squinted his eyes and smiled. At this time, Lanyu asked with some dissatisfaction, "Guzé, do you have to do this? I just came to see you. You came all the way here just to put on a show for me? Was it a public display of affection? Do you think you're the only one with a wife?" Guzé smiled lightly. "Lanyu, you're treating me like an outsider." He paused for a moment. "I have to thank you on behalf of Cece for coming all the way here to see her." Lanyu's eyes were a little cold, but he restrained himself with Cece around, because the little fool was already looking over. Chapter 3080. Lin Cece nodded with a dazed expression. But she had always listened to him and quickly ran out. She looked like a child when she ran out. She was still the same as before, but in Lanyu's eyes, there was bitterness. He had taken care of Cece for so long and he knew her personality the best. She loved freedom so much. Every time she wanted to come out, she would purposely set fire to the nursing home in exchange for a few months of time outside. But here, she was willing to lose her freedom for Guzé. This kind of love, this kind of sacrifice, Guzé might not understand. Guzé's heart would be like everyone else's. By marrying Cece, he would be responsible for her. But what did Cece do wrong? She liked Guzé, but she had no obligation to lose her freedom for this love. She didn't understand, but Lanyu felt it was not worth it for her. Lanyu watched Cece's back quietly and said lightly, "Guzé, do you think Cece is happy?" Guzé held up a cup of tea. Lanyu could see that Cece had just drunk it. He looked at Guzé, without batting an eyelid as he took a sip. Guzé finished drinking and put down the cup. He smiled. "Are you happy? Cece and I are married." Lanyu sneered. "Why did you exile her so far away?" "Guzé, if you think marrying her is embarrassing, then don't marry her. I can take care of her for the rest of her life." Guzé lowered his eyes and looked at the half-bitten osmanthus pastry at the side. He said slowly, "Do you think I despise her? What else?" Guzé gritted his teeth and stared straight at Guzé. Guzé smiled lightly. "I'm a little curious. Why didn't you come to me to reason with me before?" But now, although he said this, he didn't seem to want an answer from Lanyu. He continued, "Have you ever thought that she will be disturbed in B-City? She won't be able to face those things for long. She will be frightened by the reporters. Do you think the overwhelming reports will be good for Cece? Guzé, you are her husband. You should protect her." Lanyu said coldly, "Don't make excuses for yourself. You're just afraid of trouble." You think she's an idiot, so all you have to do is push her far away. She won't be able to hear those nasty words, and you think the world is too flat? Guze, you really have a good plan, but what if one day Cece remembers everything and she returns to her original self? Do you think you can still live this kind of life with her, or do you think you can just bring her back to be city? Guze narrowed his eyes. Lanyu sneered. Love doesn't come so easily, Guze. Do you think you can hide your marriage from your parents and the media? Let me tell you, the bigger your company is, the more likely Cece will be exposed. Do you choose to protect the stock price or your wife?
You don't have to answer me.
You just have to know the answer in your heart. Guze's voice was low. It seems that you are here for the trial today?
No.
Lanyu's voice was very low. I just hope Cece can live well. That's all. Guze was about to say something when he saw Lin Cece standing at the door, with a cautious look on her face. His heart felt a stab of pain, and he calmly asked her to come over. His little fool walked over very slowly. She didn't stick to him like before. She said softly, I brought the food upstairs. Chapter 3081. After saying that, she went to pick up her things. She moved them upstairs in 2 batches. The 2 men watched her move them. She didn't come down after moving them. Guze looked at Lanyu. I'll go up and have a look. Lanyu nodded. Maybe she heard what I said. Go and have a look. He didn't agree with Guze in his heart, but Guze was the best person to comfort her at this time. Guze went upstairs. He pushed open the door of the master bedroom and saw a few boxes of osmanthus dessert boxes lying around, not as carefully as she usually did. His little fool was sitting by the bay window in front of the French window, staring out of it in silence and fascination. Guze walked over and sat next to her. What are you thinking about? His little fool's chin was on her knees, and there was a sharp look in her eyes. Guze, what is the stock price? Is it very important? Guze reached out and touched her little head. Why do you ask that? Because Lanyu asked you, would you choose the stock price or me? So, I think it must be very important to you. Lin Cece's eyes were on his face as she said that. He sighed. Cece, you think too much. That day will never come. The little fool was quite stubborn. What if that day comes? After saying that, she stared at him, waiting for his reaction. Guze smiled and rubbed her little head again. Cece, what do you want me to choose? Lin Cece bit her lip. I don't know because I don't understand, but I know that if you don't choose me, it means that you don't want me anymore. She looked a little distressed. But if that thing is very important to you, then I think it's good that you're happy. Guze's voice was a little hoarse. Even if one day I choose the stock price that Lanyu mentioned? She nodded and nodded. Yes, I'll still be happy. It's not like we'll be separated forever. We can still see each other if we want to. Nothing had happened, but she was actually comforting him. In Guze's heart, there was an indescribable feeling, but this feeling was so piercing. He hugged her and smiled. It's not easy for Lanyu to come over. Go down and talk to him. Although he was a little jealous in his heart, Guze was not such a petty person. The reason why he came here today was not because he specially came from B City. Besides, he could not make it in time. It was because he was on a business trip in C City and didn't tell Cece. Originally, he didn't plan to come because his schedule was tight and flew straight to New York. But now that Lanyu was here, he couldn't help but come over to take a look. But when he came over, he seemed to have made the little fool unhappy. He wanted her to be happy. He wanted her to grow up happily in the castle he had built for her. Since she could not be the queen, he would spoil her like a princess. Guze looked at her smiling face, and his eyes became gentle. He reached out and touched her little head. I can only accompany you for dinner. I have to catch a private plane later, okay? There was a hint of disappointment in Cece's eyes. She bit her lip. You haven't come over for a long time. You just came and left. Guze stroked her hair. After I'm done with my work, I'll come over to see you. I'll stay for a few more days. His little fool replied with an oh, but she was obviously unhappy. He smiled and let her down. She was like a child. She was unhappy just now, but after talking with Lanyu, she smiled until her eyes were squinted. Chapter 3082. Of course, it was impossible for Lanyu to stay there for a few days. Firstly, Qinshan was there, and secondly, Guze wasn't around. If Cece hadn't been married in the past, it would have been fine. He would have treated Cece as a child. But now that she was married, Lanyu had scruples. He was afraid that Guze would overthink it. Lanyu knew how petty a man could be when he was jealous. Therefore, after the meal, he wanted to leave, but Guze left even faster than him. He didn't look like he was leaving. Lanyu looked at Cece's expression and couldn't bear to leave immediately. Hence, he accompanied her for a while. When Guze opened the car door, his little fool couldn't help but run over. She raised her head and looked at him. Her fingers pressed on the car door stubbornly, not letting him move. Guze's voice was a little soft. Cece? Cece pursed her lips. When are you coming back? Guze's heart softened. He said softly, I'll be back after I'm done with work. Listen to Auntie. Cece's little face was a little stunned. Then, she mustered up her courage and asked, Can I have Mummy accompany me? She didn't know why she didn't rely on her mummy much in the past. She didn't want it either. Because Lanyu said that she was her mummy, she just accepted it. However, after she got together with Guze, she wanted to see her mummy more and more. However, Guze said that it was best if they didn't meet. Cece didn't understand why he would think that way. However, she didn't dare to mention it to him until now. After saying that, she looked at him nervously, hoping that he would agree. However, Guze was still the same as before. He rubbed her little head and said softly, When I'm free, I'll arrange for you guys to meet. Cece raised her head and looked at him. Her eyes were a little hollow. She had her own thoughts, but she was not as kind as them. Thus, in her disappointment, she asked the question in her heart, Why can't she accompany me all the time? Why can't she be like Auntie? Why do you have to arrange the meeting? Guze raised his hand to look at the time and sighed. Cece, I'll explain to you next time. I have to catch a private plane now. I have to go. She stood there without moving. She did not speak to him, nor did she say goodbye. Guze pursed his thin lips, but in the end, he still gritted his teeth and left. When he got into the car, he still felt a little guilty. The car started slowly, and she was still standing in the same place. Guze suddenly remembered that Cece's birthday was in 2 days, and he could not celebrate it for her. He sighed inwardly. Let's celebrate when we get back. Thus, he closed his eyes and told the driver, Drive faster. He had to catch a private plane. Guze was very busy. He was so busy that he almost had no time to take care of his little wife, who was not healthy at all. He always thought that he could spend time with her after he was done with his work, but Guze did not think that his little fool would no longer be waiting for him in the same place when he was done with his work. She would grow up, and she would not always be his little fool. Cece stood behind the car, looking a little disappointed. Lanyu stood beside her and patted her shoulder. Cece, will you laugh at me? Her voice was so hoarse that it seemed like she was about to cry. Lanyu hugged her. It was a very warm hug, just like in the past. Lanyu suddenly made a decision. He looked down at Cece and said, Do you want to stay in a hotel with me for 2 days? But with your sister Qinshan. Sister Qinshan. Chapter 3083. Lanyu comforted her softly. Cece, it's your birthday in 2 days. Do you want to celebrate? Besides, Sister Qinshan won't hold it against you, because you're still a child. Cece's sadness faded a little, and she kept looking at Lanyu. Really? Lanyu smiled and nodded. Of course. Cece replied softly. Annie won't let me go out if she knows. I'll sit in your car secretly and call back when I'm out, okay? Lanyu thought about it and agreed. If he talked to Guze now, he probably wouldn't go on a business trip and bring Cece back. What would be the point? Hence, Lanyu stayed for a while longer. He didn't get into the car until 4 in the afternoon, When Guze was supposed to be on the private plane, Cece had already found a chance to lie in the backseat. Lanyu saw her face in the rearview mirror and started the car. The car slowly drove out of the gate. Cece couldn't wait to pop her little head out and let out a long breath. Then, she rolled down the window and looked outside. Her gaze was a little greedy. Lanyu kept an eye on her as he drove. His gaze darkened. Cece wasn't happy. She was like a bird in a cage. Moreover, she was afraid of Guze. Because she loved him deeply, she was afraid. Lanyu threw the phone to her. "Call Auntie and tell her that I'm taking you away to play for 3 to 4 days." The silly girl looked at him in a daze. She still knew how to be afraid. "Can you call?" Lanyu smiled. "Auntie, you tell her. I'll talk to Guze." The little fool was beaming with joy and happily called the auntie. She was afraid that Auntie would be angry, so she spoke softly. But after she said it, Auntie only sighed and said softly, "Then have fun for a few days." "Auntie, aren't you angry?" Cece asked softly. Auntie sighed. "I'm not angry, but it's better to talk to Sir first next time." Cece sounded a little aggrieved, but he won't allow it. That was the key. The auntie sighed and hung up the phone. She knew that Guze had hung up the phone on the plane. It must be Mr. Lan's idea. Mr. Lan would tell him. In fact, she felt sorry for Cece. Cece was a madam, but her temperament was like that of a child, and it was obvious that she loved her husband very much. It would be very hard to love someone and wait in the same place. Such a playful girl was actually willing to sit in the courtyard and wait for her teacher every day. The auntie felt sorry for Cece when she thought about it, so she did it out of selfishness. She also knew that her husband would definitely blame her, but as long as Cece could be happy for a few days, she felt that it was worth it. On the other side, when Lanyu drove back to the hotel, it was already night. Chen should have finished his work, but he didn't come back. It wasn't convenient for Lanyu to look for her with Cece, so he could only call her. No one picked up the phone. He called more than 10 times, but no one answered. Lanyu took Cece to eat something, and they sat on the sofa in the living room to watch TV. When Chen came back, it was almost 12 o'clock. He drank some wine, and it was the little wolf dog who brought him back. How could Lanyu not be angry? He dragged Chen in and said coldly to Pei Jingyu, "Good night, Mr. Pei." Compared to his anger, Pei Jingyu was very calm. "Good night, Sister Chen." Chapter 3084. Lanyu's reaction was to slam the door. Chen looked at him. "It's just a dinner with the crew. Do you have to be like this?" Lanyu's face darkened. "If it's just a party, you can call me and ask me to pick you up. It's so late now, and you're asking another man to send you back?" Chen was speechless. "Lanyu, you're being unreasonable." "Am I being unreasonable?" Lanyu said coldly. "I'll quit this job tomorrow." Chen was so angry that she wanted to slam the door. She stared at Lanyu's annoying face and said word by word, "I called you, but you didn't answer." With that, she opened the door and wanted to leave. Until then, she didn't notice that Cece was sitting on the sofa eating snacks and watching them quarrel. Chen had just opened the door when Lanyu caught her. In the next second, she was pressed against the door. Chen struggled. "Let go." "No." Lanyu said a little rascally and then murmured, "I didn't hear you." Chen, you can't sentence me to death like this. Where are you going now? Are you going to find a gigolo? I'm not going to find anyone. Can I just disappear? Chen looked away and said calmly, "You're always like this. It's hard for us to coexist peacefully." Lanyu's voice was a little hoarse. Chen, I'm just a little jealous. I just care." As he said that, he leaned toward her and buried his face in her neck. "Because I'm afraid. He's younger than me. He's just a little fresh meat. What if you really like him?" At this point, he believed himself. "Do you really like him?" He looked up and saw her serious expression. Chen wanted to laugh, but her face was still tense. "You're thinking too much, Mr. Lan." Lanyu was a little exasperated. "Chen, I really want to leave you at home when you're like this. You can't go anywhere. Then, he kissed her lips fiercely, perhaps because she was too attractive and he was too engrossed. He forgot about Lin Cece's existence in the suite. This kiss became a little hot. It was like the heavenly thunder stirring up the earth fire, and it could not be stopped. Qin resisted at first, but later, she reluctantly agreed. She drank a little and was a little interested. Just like that, they half-heartedly did it. The scene was truly explosive. The bag of snacks in Lin Cece's hand fell to the ground. She pursed her lips and said softly, "Sir, I'm here." Lan Yu's body trembled, and then a river of spring water flowed to the east. He gritted his teeth. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" The little fool had an innocent look on his face. "I didn't know you would be like this." Fortunately, the lights were not fully turned on, or else he would have seen everything. Lan Yu gritted his teeth and stepped back. He helped Qin tidy up his clothes and said in a hoarse voice, "I brought her here to stay for a few days." When he wanted to step back, Qin hugged his neck. "You didn't call me to tell me that you were bringing Cece here to stay for a few days. Lan Yu, are you only allowing the state officials to set fires, but not the common people?" She hugged him like this, a little reluctant. Lan Yu was a mature man, so he naturally understood. But there was a little fool staring at him, so he really couldn't do anything. So he snorted. "Wait for me in the bedroom. I'll take care of Cece." "Husband, do you know how to bathe her?" She hugged his neck and deliberately called him that. Chapter 3085. Qin was actually quite speechless. He had just been here in the morning and had driven all day today. Wasn't he tired? However, it was fine as long as he wasn't tired. She flipped her hair and walked towards the master bedroom. Lin Cece kept looking at her and said eagerly, "She's so beautiful." Lan Yu walked over and patted her. "All right, get up and go take a shower. I'll take you to your room." Lin Cece still sat there and asked in a low voice, "Will Sister Qin be unhappy?" "Probably." Lan Yu smiled. "But I'll coax her." The little fool blinked.
But I don't think she cares about you.
Lan Yu's face darkened.
Cece.
"I'm going to take a shower," she said in a low voice and then carefully ran to the second bedroom. But after a while, she called out, "I don't have any luggage. I don't have any pajamas." "How troublesome." Lan Yu replied from outside, "I'll go get one from Qin." After saying that, he walked back to the master bedroom. Qin was a little drunk. At this time, she was lying on her side on the big bed and had no intention of taking a shower. Lan Yu walked over and leaned over to kiss her lips. "Are you angry?" "Of course not." Qin turned over and didn't let him touch her. "I'm not that petty." He didn't feel very happy that she was so magnanimous. He frowned. "It's not what you think." "I know. She's married." Qin turned to look at Lan Yu. "Why didn't you stop her at the beginning? Now you can only let her be happy for a few days. Lan Yu's marriage is a prison for her for the rest of her life. You know that." She was blaming him, but Lan Yu was indescribably happy. He lay beside her and gently held her in his arms. He said hoarsely, "I wanted to stop her at the time, but Qin, do you know that when a person falls in love with another person, it's very crazy? The whole world probably can't stop it." Qin looked into his eyes. He smiled bitterly.
"Just like us back then."
He gently hugged her and buried his face in her neck. "I know that no matter what I say, you won't be able to be like before. I don't ask for these things. I just want you to stay by my side and not leave." Qin's heart throbbed. She wanted to see him, but he didn't want her to see his face because he lost his composure. After hugging for a while, he whispered, "Qin, I remember you brought an extra set of pajamas, didn't you?" Qin looked down. "You want me to give the pajamas to your mistress?" As soon as she finished speaking, she was hit by him. "What concubine?" "She is Gu Zhe's wife. Even Gu Zhe doesn't love her as much as you do." Qin snorted, but still went to the changing room and picked out a t-shirt for him. "She's small, so this can be her pajamas." Lan Yu walked over and hugged her from behind. My wife is so generous. How about I reward you tonight? Qin turned around and said with a fake smile, You can think of it as my guilt after having an affair. Lan Yu patted her again. I'll get the clothes for Cece. I'll be back in a while. Qin smiled and didn't say anything. She also took a set of pajamas to take a shower and go to bed. She was tired after a busy day. Lan Yu kissed her for a while and whispered to her to wait for him to come back. Qin said a few words before he left. Chapter 3086. Lan Yu reached out and patted her little head. I sent a message to Gu Zhe. He'll receive it when he gets off the plane. Lin Cece replied with an "Oh" and then asked, Will he be angry? He will be angry. But if you always go along with him and he won't be angry, then there will be a problem. Lan Yu patiently taught her like he was teaching a child. If you leave, he will panic and care, right? Even after he said it, Lin Cece didn't quite understand, so she just looked at him blankly. Lan Yu sat down and talked to her for half an hour, but she still didn't understand. Lan Yu sighed. You'd better go take a shower and sleep. In this life, she could only be controlled by Gu Zhe, unless she could remember everything and her brain could return to normal. Lin Cece obeyed and felt Gu Zhe's disappointment. She whispered, I'll work hard. I'll definitely be able to understand in the future. Lan Yu's heart softened. How could he bear to scold her? He reached out and rubbed her long hair. Go to sleep. He was worried about her and kept guarding her. When she came out of the bathroom, he covered her with a quilt. Cece was afraid of water. Because she had drowned, she usually needed someone to take care of her in bed. For a man like Gu Zhe, it was very difficult to take care of such a wife. Lan Yu knew this in his heart, so that damn Gu Zhe had banished Cece here. He was a little angry in his heart, but his face was calm. He covered her with a quilt, turned off the light, and sat for a while before leaving. To him, Cece was a child. Even if it was only for a few days, he still had to take good care of her. Back in the bedroom, Lan Yu's heart was filled with worries. Qin hadn't fallen asleep yet. Seeing him standing by the window smoking, she sat up slightly and leaned against the head of the bed. Why are you still smoking? Lan Yu turned his head and looked at her calmly for a while. He said lightly, I can't sleep. Their conversation was like that of an old married couple. Qin looked at him. You can't change anything no matter how annoyed you are. Cece likes Gu Zhe, so she can endure it. But if one day she doesn't like him anymore, she probably won't want to endure it anymore. I know. However, as you can see, she is not healthy now.
Lan Yu sighed softly.
Fortunately, the auntie who takes care of her is patient with her. Otherwise, our days will be tough. An unfamiliar environment, a person who had to wait forever. He opened his heart to her and said such words. Qin's heart throbbed, and his gaze softened as he looked at him. Lan Yu put out the cigarette, walked back to the bed, sat on the head of the bed, and pulled her over into his arms. He kissed her forehead hard. Chen, when I brought her back from New York, she was pregnant, and she can't have children in the future. As he spoke, his voice was somewhat bitter. She herself became a child. Qin was silent for a long time. Hearing his words, she actually felt very sad, as if she had experienced it with Lin Cece herself. She looked at him and said in a low voice, Come see her often in the future.
I'll accompany you.
Lan Yu didn't say anything, and just patted her hand. Since their reunion, he felt that his heart and Qin's were very close for the first time. She was indeed a very generous person. Not only was she not angry, but she also understood him. That night, he did nothing but hold her in his arms. Chapter 3087. Qin didn't sleep well either. She had a messy dream the whole night. There were Cece, Lan Yu, and Ronglei. Her mind was in a mess. When she woke up, her back was covered in cold sweat. Qin opened her eyes. In front of her was Lan Yu's magnified, handsome face. He had slept with his clothes on last night. She looked out of the window again. The sky was just dawn. It wasn't bright yet. Chen blinked her sore eyes. She carefully moved Lan Yu's arm away and got up gently. Lan Yu was sleeping soundly. There was no movement. She got up and walked to the secondary bedroom quietly. She didn't know why she wanted to see Lin Cece. Looking at the girl who was well protected by Lan Yu, she didn't feel uncomfortable at all. There was only heartache. Perhaps it was because Chen had become a mother and had little Rongyu. Cece was also like a child. She carefully opened the door. She saw Lin Cece sitting on the bed with her sharp chin resting on her chin. She was looking outside. Her gaze was very careful, very much like fragile porcelain. Chen looked at her quietly for a while. Then, she pushed the door and sat beside her. "Are you thinking about Guze?" Lin Cece was shocked. Her eyes were wide open. Chen looked at her palm-sized face. She thought that Cece was really cute. No wonder Guze wanted to marry her. She knew that Guze used to like Mu for many years. But for Cece, he unexpectedly got married in a flash. Chen smiled. "Are you afraid of me?"
No.
Lin Cece said softly. "I'm just afraid that you'll be angry." "I won't." "Why would I be angry at you? Cece is very cute. Lan Yu and I both like you." Chen simply leaned against the headboard and reached out to rub her little head as if he was petting a little pet. If Lin Cece had recovered her memory, she would probably laugh like crazy. His voice was soft and light. "Are you afraid that Guze will be angry and come back to blame you?" Lin Cece lowered her eyes and didn't say another word. Chen knew that he was right and smiled. Lan Yu said that he would talk to Guze. "Don't worry, and just stay here for 2 days. I have to film, but I can accompany you at night. I can take you to eat skewers, I can take you to the movies, you can go anywhere you want." Lin Cece pursed her lips. "Then can I go back to B-City with you?" Chen was stunned. "Back to B-City? I want to give Guze a surprise when he returns." A smile appeared on Lin Cece's face. That smile was also careful and carried a little happiness. Chen looked at it and felt a little sad and distressed. He hugged her. "Okay, I'll convince Lan Yu to take you back." This was a big risk, because Lin Cece was someone else's wife. After Chen said that, Lin Cece's phone on the bedside table rang. Instantly, Lin Cece's expression became a little tense. She picked up the phone and looked at it. She said in a very low voice, "It's Guze. He will definitely scold me." Chen looked at her. Lin Cece placed the phone in Chen's palm and looked at it pitifully. Chen smiled. "Are you afraid of him?" The little fool lowered her head. Chen picked up the phone. His voice was very calm. "I'm Chen." On the other side of the phone, Guze was stunned for a moment and then said coldly, "Let Cece answer the phone." Chen said very objectively, "She is so scared now that she doesn't dare to answer." Chapter 3088. Chen sighed. Cece's appearance clearly showed that she had been completely devoured. After a while, Cece put down her phone with a depressed expression. Chen teased her. "Did you get scolded?" Lin Cece looked up. "I'd better not go to B-City." Chen looked at her. "What's wrong?" Lin Cece's eyes were stained with tears. "He seems to be angry." Chen hugged her.
How can that be?
If a person gets angry with another person so easily, then he doesn't really love her and tolerate her. Lin Cece looked up at him and said softly, "Really, Sister Chen?" "Of course." Chen reached out and patted her head, smiling. "Sleep for a while more. I'll ask Lan Yu to take you out to eat delicious food during the day, and I'll take you out to play at night." Lin Cece immediately became happy again. She nodded and lay down obediently. After lying down, she put her arms around Chen's neck and began to count the lambs. Chen was a little confused. After a while, he turned his head to look at Lin Cece. "Do you sleep like this with Guze?" Lin Cece blushed and said after a long time, "No, I don't even need to count before I fall asleep from exhaustion." Qin Chun was speechless. Cece was too straightforward. So straightforward that she was a little embarrassed. No matter what, Lin Cece had fallen asleep. Qin Chun was still lying on the bed, letting the little fool lie on his chest and drool. She felt that she owed Lin Cece something to be hugged like a man. However, there was a touch of warmth in her heart. She felt as if she had slept with a little girl in her arms. It was also this warm. Qin Chun even felt at ease. It wasn't she who gave it to Cece, but Cece who gave it to her. Qin Chun suddenly had a feeling that in the depths of her memory, Lin Cece might be an important person. But Cece, she had become like this. He couldn't get anything out of her. Qin Chun lay down and thought about many things, but she couldn't remember anything about the past. She couldn't think too much about it because her head would hurt. At 8 o'clock, she had no choice but to get up. She lowered her head and was about to move Lin Cece away when she saw her. Lin Cece was drooling and sleeping soundly. Her face was as calm as a child's. Qin Chun looked at her quietly for a while, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. Only then did he carefully move her away and return to the master bedroom. After returning home, Lanyu was still sleeping. He was probably tired from last night. Qin Chun smiled and was about to go to the locker room to change when someone hugged him from behind. Lanyu moved his face close to her ear and whispered, "Why are you up? You went to see Cece?" Qin Chun grunted, then turned around and said, "You sleep a little longer. I have to go shoot the advertisement." Lanyu hugged her for a while. When she thought he would let go, he said softly, "Wait for me. I'll take you there." Qin Chun was stunned. Lanyu patted her with a smile and then let go. "What's wrong? Isn't it normal for a husband to send his wife to work?" Qin Chun wanted to say something, but Lanyu interrupted her. "Chun Chun, it's not a purpose. It's just because I want to be good to you." He said quite sincerely, "Chun Chun, I may have a seizure occasionally, but I will control myself. If I really can't, I will apologize and coax you." You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.